as an extended intro to my two dear guests here, say a few words. Elizabeth Alker, who's a eminent music journalist and radio presenter. Interestingly, she has worked or made an imprint on my two favorite radio stations in the BBC, BBC Radio 3 and BBC 6 Music. So if you've got two souls in your chest, as Goethe once said, Faust once said, that's me with musically, you know, and obviously grown up with classical music education, but also a keen interest in anything sort of alternative rock, electronic and pop music, then you would sort of go between BBC Radio 3 and 6. And this is actually what Elizabeth has done for a while. I should also say that she started a radio program on Radio 3, BBC Radio 3, that is called Unclassified. It's kind of a late night program. It became sort of a cult radio program quite quickly, and I was an avid listener of it. So this is basically, I'll maybe ask Elizabeth in a moment to describe it herself. But I then contacted Elizabeth. We didn't know each other. I contacted her and said, I love this program so much. Could we not do a live version of it? And then we railed in the BBC people and the South Bank, the Royal Festival Hall, with resident orchestras there. In fact, especially the BBC Concert Orchestra, and started this. So we made this radio program into a live show, a concert, and it's called Unclassified. And I guess this is also very much fitting in with the theme we're going to talk about a little bit. So it's a great pleasure to have you here, Elizabeth. Normally, Elizabeth is leading these sort of panel talks, but now I've taken over a little bit already. And then there's this book, Everything We Do Is Music, which is exactly, well, it's taking one subject that is exactly to do with the influences between classic, contemporary and avant-garde pop music, I suppose. And we should talk a little bit about it. And then on my other side, an even older friend and collaborator really in music, Owen Pallett, who is not only a fabulous singer-songwriter, but composer, multi-instrumentalist, and he composes classical music famously. Well, I don't know if you know that he's composed a violin concerto for Pekka Kuusisto. Maybe Tapiola Sinfonietta have done it.
Yeah.
But it's a wonderful piece that we're still thinking about recording.
I have to revise it first.
Yeah, sure. And then lots of scores for films and TV, but also concert pieces, and of course his albums, one of which we heard part of on last Thursday night. So I know Elizabeth has prepared. I want to start with Elizabeth and your thoughts.
I wanted to start by asking Owen about we've seen you do two absolutely beautiful shows. Well, I have since I arrived on Thursday, Owen. And just on Friday night, we saw your solo set with the pedal board. And you were telling us a little bit about it, about parts of it that were, that you're using for purposes that they weren't devised for and that kind of thing. I just wondered how this setup developed, really, because it started in the live context, didn't it, before you figured out a way to take it to the studio?
Yeah, well, in 2007, having started doing the solo looping project and just using the Boss RC20, which was, the ground zero for everybody and their dog becoming a looper, I wanted to try and expand and have something that, offered more flexibility, and I found Max MSP. So I was working on Max MSP, and for several years I was traveling around with a rack unit and running cables all over the stage and setting up my computer. I had a dedicated computer that I wasn't getting any of the updates because I didn't want the application to crash and all this kind of stuff. And I started to feel really, really frustrated just with how, in having to work with this laptop on stage. And so I was always just kind of reading technical manuals and being like, how can I change this? I don't know if this is normal for other people. You're always reading manuals of new gear coming out to see if you can completely upset your creative process. So at a certain point, I was looking at this what this object, it's called a switchblade, 8F, can do, and it's just a guitar switcher. It switches pedals around in the chain so that you can have your delay going into your distortion, or your distortion into your delay, or whatever. And it's used by, I think Johnny Greenwood has 2 of them in his rig. I'm sure lots of people use them. It's a popular item. But I was looking at it and I saw that there were these LFOs that were within it, where you could kind of almost, not just LFOs that would run continuously, but LFOs that could extend for an entire length of a minute. They're called one-shot LFOs. And I was just like, you could theoretically have scene to scene to scene floating like within the analog environment in just this pedalboard environment. So I laid out all these scenes like head to toe, head to toe, head to toe, and I just switched through the presets, and the whole sonic architecture just can slowly shift and change. And like anybody who's a string player and is homosexual, I'm really, really into Arthur Russell and World of Echo and the way that you kind of feel like you're moving through these different environments. And so I kind of started developing that in 2017. And that's what I did. But now, since I've been here and speaking with Ville, I'm going to change it all up. I'm going to go back to the computer. I'm going to get a Kima system. Yeah, I'm going to do it in the sound dome. Yeah, no, I'm still kind of keeping my eyes open for ways I can change it.
Yeah, that's so interesting. It's changing all the time. And just this, this idea of it kind of starting with the live show, it just feels to me that your process is very interactive and it's actually evolved really publicly. And I just, I wondered what that's like for you. I think it's quite a unique thing. A lot of artists go into the studio and then perhaps come out with something that feels more fully formed. And another thought, this is kind of 2 parts of this question really, but I think we feel as though we're seeing something come together in real time, which we are in a way, but also there's a lot of programming that's gone on behind the scenes.
Right. Well, I decided really early on that I wanted all the material that was being generated to be generated visibly to the audience. And I feel like it's important that the audience see what I'm doing. There's, because there is something about going to see a concert where there's the interaction between physical act and the sound generation, which isn't it's just something I wanted to focus on, make sure that I wasn't, relying on a backing track at any point, So, yeah, that was just kind of important to me. And it kind of also just informed my general demeanor on stage as well.
In what way?
I don't know. I've just always been really kind of, I don't know, the opposite of showmanship.
But even the drum, because you synthesize the drum sounds as well, don't you? They're all kind of, there's so much gone into it behind.
Well, there's a company in Canada out of Ottawa called Empress Effects, and they made this box called the Zoya, and it's basically kind of a modernized version of the Nord Modular, except that there's no computer interactivity. You have to use it like a child's toy, setting up all these different objects, but it's a really weirdly limited device in certain ways that only can have 64 presets, which is normal for Empress Effects. Like everybody in Canada is emailing Empress being like, can you have more presets, please? God, it's like 2025. But you can do so many interesting things with it. You can create pitch detection, transient detection, all this kind of stuff. And so I was looking at old I think Sound on Sound, like schematics from Sound on Sound, and building like kind of different drum machines on a synthetic level, like with the, building them from oscillators and filters, and, you can trigger them when hitting the violin. And it's like, okay, well now my drum beats are sorted. So
incredible.
Yeah. So that's good.
We were talking about this yesterday, and this is perhaps a question for you as well, André. And Owen, you were saying that it's your background in the classical world, perhaps, that makes you kind of hold yourselves to these really high standards, and in the live performance, in the recording. Is that fair to say? Do you both feel that, or is it?
I don't know. I think there's this famous preconception about perfectionism being a thing that's done in the classical world because of everyone practices hours and hours and hours. And people have the preconception that in pop music or rock, everyone just rocks up, drinks, and takes a lot of drugs and then jams it out. And I always say, in my personal experience, and I've worked with a few people that have really done great things in pop music, like Damon Albarn, Owen Pallett. When I've worked with them, I kid you not, their dedication, their attention to detail, and the time they take over one song is far greater than most of the classical musicians I know spending on one piece, or even. So, for example, the example, this island album that I sort of feel I've been part of this journey that Owen had with it, starting with it in 2017. With my own group Stargaze, we first played songs of this album in completely different forms in 2017 at the Ruhrtriennale. Then a year later, Owen would send me the finished album in a way, and I didn't recognize the songs. I said, Owen, what have you done? I was so in love with this music. I was so in love. And it was completely, and this basically happened 3 more times. And then I bought the final album, and my first reaction was, oh, he's done it again. Because, and now I'm going to say something big, but you know how the art of transformation, and I will use the analogy again with Gorillaz, Damon Albarn's project that I got to know from the inside. And I was in the studio hearing early demos of certain things that I would say, this is nothing. What is this? And he's like, he could really hear it, what it was. And then sort of 2 years later, you hear it on the radio as an absolute hit, and it's transformed, and the greatness of it is unbelievable. It's like when you read Beethoven's journals, and you see a little thing, and you think, this is nothing. And then you hear the Fifth Symphony. I know these are big comparisons, and you may say, idiot, but there is something about it. And, and I wanted to ask Owen also about the composition process. You write a song, but then arrangement and stuff you put around it, like a dress on the bones, like sometimes people say this is what you do. Composition process, arrangement, so many transformations, and part of composition I feel is transformation. So maybe I can ask, now I've forgotten what the original question was you were going, but this is about the class, how much classical music maybe, or classical music practices influences our seriousness in working on this, but I don't think that, as I was saying, that's the case, because I've seen people working in pop music and electronic music that their work process is incredibly complex, if sometimes a little bit more intuitional. And I'm actually interested in, we talked about the technology of all this stuff, and you're like a composer performer, like in the old style. How much, so when you compose songs, like for this set on Friday, how much is this part of the compositional process, or even crucial for the compositional process, as opposed to writing a violin concerto for Pekka Kuusisto?
Oh, well, it's a completely different process.
Right.
I disagree with you, though. I think that the classical music tradition has a level of instrumental virtuosity that you don't really see in pop music, like, period. Sorry.
I'm talking about...
Yes,
but you're saying... I'm not talking about that, because virtuosity...
You see it in jazz, but not in pop music so much.
But for me, the level of virtuosity is a super superficial thing. When we're talking about the depths of composition or substance of art, then virtuosity, that is the problem sometimes for classical music, that virtuosity overrides the content and the soul of it and the level of depth. So that's what I'm talking about. People dedicated about their music and working it out in detail. It's interesting that we have this. You would think we would argue the opposite way. But.
With you saying this, talking about this kind of kernel of an idea, and I wonder if your education in classical, when you're starting a song, can you think of, is Ligeti and Schumann and Charles Ives, are these people perhaps in the background you've had exposure to this music and education in this music? So even when there's a germ of an idea, you've got a lot to draw in terms of what it might become, or what you might, hope for it. Or...
Yeah, when the influence of 20th century Western classical music on my album making definitely just is because I've been exposed to a lot of it, and because it's mostly what I listen to at home, But it's not just that. There's a lot of influence from jazz, particularly the way jazz albums are produced and recorded. That and there's a lot of stuff from pop and folk music that I'm just like, oh, I want to. It's actually kind of as corny as I want to make a song that sounds like it was written by Nick Drake and scored by Ligeti. There it is. Here's the idea. Let's make the song. It is really as basic as that.
But is it therefore, do you not feel you have these two souls in your jazz. So do you compartmentalize? You say, now I'm doing classical music and maybe film scoring is part of that, and now I'm doing my songs and it's pop music. Do you totally compartmentalize, or do you think, no, it's all one thing of the same, maybe just two sides of the same coin? Or
it's interesting. It's interesting that you should ask that, because I have not really created as much concert music as people think. Like I maybe have 20 pieces to my name, you know, but oftentimes when I'm commissioned to do something, when I'm speaking with the commissioning body, it's clear that they want something that's somewhat adjacent or drawn from the same language as my solo records. Like they almost kind of want it to be a little poppier than, you know, I might expect, because sometimes when I want to write a piece of concert music, it's just going to be really difficult and dense and, you know, or sparse or dissonant, you know. So I have kind of tried to find a balance between, you know, what I'm looking for. And certainly I think with the Pekka's concerto and a ballet that I wrote for the National Ballet of Canada, I kind of was able to find this sort of like thing, because they just they need me to write tonal music, otherwise they're not interested.
Right.
So yeah, I've had to try and kind of develop a language that's tonal and works in that world and makes people happy.
I was going to ask, is the pop song actually quite a good vehicle for avant-garde influences? You know, is it, just having seen the show on Thursday with the orchestra and hearing these sonorities that are still quite strange to hear with in that format, but it was so perfectly balanced, I thought. And I, you know, I wonder if the rhythm and the form and just how you think perhaps the pop song lends itself to those sounds and those sonorities and those influences.
I mean, I'm not sure. I think that a lot of pop songs, because you're kind of expecting a certain kind of like set of ingredients in the material, that when things get shifted out of whack, it's a lot more dramatic, you know. So like when Bacharach is writing a song and then suddenly he's throwing in these really, you know, almost more, you know, kind of late romantic kind of like movements. It sounds avant-garde, but it's not. It's just, you know, he's just bringing a bit of Brahms under the charts, you know. But so yeah, I'm not really sure how to answer that. But when I was writing the songs for Island in particular, I did jettison a number of the songs that we played together back in 2017, because I didn't feel as if they were adventurous enough. Like I felt like they were still kind of a little too safe. And others, like I changed the tonality. Like I just was noticing the other day that I think most of the songs were written in a different key and the melody is in a different key, and then I changed the key of the chords. And so it was originally like kind of a different relationship between melody and harmony. But yeah, I don't know. I don't really know how to comment on that.
I'm thinking like the microtonal, perhaps.
Yeah, I have a question for both of you regarding that. So I guess one of the most prominent features in Owen's arrangements for the orchestra for pop songs, well, for his own songs, which I wouldn't even call necessarily pop songs, is this microtonal, not just string writing, but for the whole orchestra. And I want to ask him why. Why does he do that? I mean, famously, he told me once he tried Arcade Fire's famous Reflector album, and Reflector, the hit single itself with David Bowie on it, and Owen was asked to put some string arrangements, and he said, yeah, he tried to ruin it by putting these microtonal cluster chords in it, and you only hear it at the very end if you want to check it.
That is total apocrypha. That is not anything that happened or anything I said happened.
It's on there though. Listen to the end. You got these swirling microtonal string chords sort of fading away at the very. But I wonder why this. And Elizabeth, you have interviewed people for your book, including Paul McCartney, talking about influences of tape music, Stockhausen and Berio, and Johnny Greenwood, who clearly was influenced by Penderecki and Ligeti's writing. I think we can hear it in Owen's music. Why do you think that is? Why are people like that interested in that particular period of music or that particular technique of writing? Is it a sonic world? Is it sort of because it lends itself to, it's quite close to electronic music and electronic sound worlds? Did you find, to these people you talk to, do you find there's a red thread between these people? Why they're...
Paul McCartney was interesting. He talks about it being psychedelic.
Yeah.
That was how he described it.
Yeah.
So it felt to him like a psychedelia,
Yeah.
an otherworldly thing, perhaps because it wasn't commonly heard in his world. And then maybe the combination of what they were doing with this sound world was super psychedelic.
Yeah. And Johnny Greenwood is maybe a brother in mind, isn't he? He also actually famous. He's also a string player, violist in this case, just like Owen, trained string player, and he straddles both worlds. And his music and his string writing, I can see some kinship with you. Would you say? That? Have you ever talked to him about that?
No, we don't really know each other, but it's been interesting because like I'll write a song and put it out, and then like a few years later, Radiohead will put out a song that sounds exactly like what I've done, and because I don't really listen to much Radiohead, I'll do a song and then people point out that Johnny Greenwood had done something similar, and at a certain point, somebody tried to talk about maybe we were ripping each other off, and I just actually think we just listened to the same music. Yeah. We have just this probably a very common ground of like of favorite pieces.
I should point out that Radiohead was sort of a decade later did that thing where they used an orchestra using microtonal strings. I think that last album they used the London Contemporary Orchestra on, didn't they? With Johnny doing but you were kind of about 10, 15 years ahead of that?
No. Yeah. I mean, you can trace it all the way back to Angela Morley working on Scott Walker records in the 60s.
No, I'm talking about Radiohead only.
Oh, okay. Well, no, I had to disappear completely off of whatever album that's from. Is that Kid A? I don't remember. 2000, I guess. Yeah. I mean, there's no actual microtones in that arrangement, but there's some aleatoric soundy kind of stuff. It's I mean that when I first heard that, I was like a kid. I was 20, and it knocked my socks off. It's a great arrangement.
It's true though that Scott Walker, mentioning Scott Walker, he worked with the London Sinfonietta, I think, in the late 90s, early 2000s. So there was also this connection working with musicians from the contemporary music world. Up until
I was going to ask about that. It's like the balance that I thought was so perfect on Thursday. How do you nail that? These many things coming together, but it's so lean and I don't know, just feels so perfectly balanced to me, with the rhythmically, harmonically, and.
Well, the goal when I'm writing a piece of music, whether it's for the live context or recorded context or the chamber music context, it's always to elicit an emotional response, and which is kind of tacky, but that's how it is, and I think myself I've found that when you think about the development of 12-tone theory and then into serialism, it's like you almost, because I remember reading Boulez in particular talking about like how he really wanted to kind of almost arrive at the final stage of how this language could create representations of absolute chaos, but ordered chaos, and he got it, It's like when you listen to the greatest hits of Boulez, it's just like it does actually sound like he's achieved this almost kind of like level of perfection akin to Mozart's greatest works. It has that kind of stillness. For me, I'm interested in finding ways of that aleatoric and microtonal and how do they pronounce it? XN harmonic, when they have the 37 note tones. Anybody? Xen harmonic, is that what they call it? Anyone?
I've not heard of it.
XEN harmonic. It's when they have 27 note scales or 31 note scales. Oh, okay. Anyways, I'm mostly interested in how this can apply to eliciting basic ass human emotions.
Yeah. It's like
contrast,
isn't it?
Yeah.
That can feel maybe like Paul McCartney said, it's like almost there's a psychedelia there when it's
exactly, because I don't have the same ambitions as Pierre Boulez. I just want to make people wet their pants a little bit when they hear something, So and figuring out how you can do that with in the case of Island, it's equally influenced by Grisey, and spectralist kind of writing. So, but
can we talk about maybe electronic music as a gateway between the two genres, because it seems that's the most natural realm where the two worlds meet. And I want to ask you, Elizabeth, can you, because the unclassified program, I guess, it has a lot of sort of ambient electronic composers who also enter into the contemporary classical world. I wanted to ask you, what was your, maybe you can talk a bit about Unclassified, what was your impulse in starting this program, and have you dealt with a lot of creators, maybe who originally come from the more the pop or folk world, even electronic music, avant-garde pop world, but they engage with classical contemporary in some way?
Part of it was because when I left Six Music and went to Radio 3, and Radio 3 during the day is core classical rep, and there are lots of composers coming out of conservatoires that I was getting to know, young composers who wanted to write electronic music, but their sound world was almost too jarring, or producers and bosses were feeling it was too jarring to put on during the day. And
this is Radio 3.
Yeah, on Radio 3. And I was thinking, this is going to have to change. Like, they're going to have to find a way to put this new music, all these hundreds of years later, you know, on the daytime programs. And so I was just interested in finding a way to kind of do that, and a show that could ease people into it, I suppose. I don't know, you know, whatever people might think about that, I don't know, but and the ambient side of that felt like a bit of a gateway, and then, you know, you can build up and build up and build up. So that was I was just interested in that, and I was finding people like Anna Meredith, and, you know, we could play that. It's quite a banging sound world, but she's writing in this classical style. Six Music can play that, but Radio 3 didn't. So I was coming from that radio background, I suppose, with that idea.
I guess Anna Meredith is a good example of somebody who came from academic classical contemporary music. She went through, you know, the Scottish College and everything, and she had classical composition teachers. How, when you look for people to include in your program, do you feel more people are now coming from different backgrounds? Or is there a good mix of people coming from the academic schools of classical composition, contemporary, and others who come from self-taught, writing songs, tracking songs on, you know, in their home studios, on a laptop and so on?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture, isn't it? And it's what you have access to, as you know, and I think that was, these composers were thinking, oh, we would like to maybe able to work with an orchestra and have that opportunity that Radio 3 can provide, and that we're funded to provide as well. So, but that was going to just certain people and who were writing in a certain way. So a lot of the composers were working with what they could develop for the show to be financially viable and heard. And
but the interesting thing is, now maybe saying something provocative, because we've just experienced, so when we put out the Unclassified Live program, we had 3 shows a year. What was it, 2017, 18? No, 19, just before the pandemic hit. And every one of these shows in the South Bank Queen Elizabeth Hall was a huge success and the most vibrant audiences I've ever experienced in London. Then the pandemic hit and all got a bit difficult, also of the difficulties the South Bank had with reopening. But now we're sort of, not quite, especially not in the UK, back to normal. But and now we're finding it difficult to do more than one a year. So there has been sort of, and I wonder, because you just said this word, accessibility of certain composers from certain backgrounds to orchestras, working with orchestras. And that's what we're funded for. So actually, based on the success of the live series and the radio program, shouldn't there be more of it, rather than now they're actually pushing it back a little bit and it's not really going anywhere? And is that where the problem lies, that they're not recognizing that we should buy into this more, we should provide more of these opportunities for the composers? Because we've experienced that even now the one a year thing is just always sold out, and it's wonderful concerts, and they cut it down. I don't know, you're talking from inside the BBC, so it's hard.
Who did you get on these? Who was programmed on these concerts?
Well, we've had all kinds of people, yeah.
We talked about Anna Meredith. Kazim Naqvi was one, you know, the drummer of Donovan. Rafik, yeah.
Aisha Devi.
No, she's an example of an electronic musician, and she had things arranged. We're working with arrangers is of course a big deal. But yeah, also some composers from the classical as well as electronic musicians. So there have been so many, it's hard now to...
I don't know. It's the answer.
Yeah. But I do, you know...
I mean, the Proms is commissioning new music, and the BBC, is committed to commissioning new music.
I mean, they're still doing that, but it's the it's the old way of commissioning recognized composers that have, established themselves with the academic background. But I just want to put that out there that I think, we're trying to be pioneering these things, but institutions don't always help. Although of course we couldn't do it without them. We couldn't do it without the BBC, and they've been championing it. It's probably not their fault. It's together between the venues that haven't got availability or that have to go commercial, that actually have to make money. So the South Bank, have more limited space for these kind of things than they used to have, and this is what worries me. Worries me a little bit.
Yeah, it is, and I guess. This is a question to both of you. Is technology will always help artists find a way as well? Is that, the necessity of finding a way to perform and loop?
I talk to a lot of composers that have given up on this orchestral world because they say it's really associated with that funding world of official funding. You have to tick the right boxes when you write applications. And they've given up on it, and they just rather do their own. That's why they become bedroom producers, even as classical, doing electronic music or working with specific musicians that they work for. And it's almost like, as I talked about the phenomenon of composer-performer, or they become performer again, be it laptop performer or doing their own style and singing or playing a double bass, like, Bara Gísladóttir, these sort of in Iceland, although she's now also becoming an orchestral composer, but they have to find their own niche and have to go sort of underground again, because the opportunities for composers to do these opera or even string quartet, orchestra are more scarce. I don't know. You have come through college.
It's just so much less stress. You just stay home and fiddle around with synthesizers and make music. It's like easy. And you keep all the money for yourself. You don't have to pay the orchestra. So it's
technology, the development of technology and the actual accessibility of technology nowadays, and it's not, when they started, New Order even started using synthesizers, they cost like £20,000 or something, and only 3 people in the UK could afford it. Nowadays that's complete. So that's a really positive thing of technology. And accessibility.
I mean, as soon as you say technology, the first thing that comes to my mind is Spotify. So I kind of like whether like my flower closes. Don't really have any comments on that. So.
But which kind of technology has opened your mind and your world in terms of using it for composition? Or do you just see it as a tool, as a technical tool, or is it a creative?
There was definitely a moment in 2008. When Logic Pro 8 came out, and the sound of its digital summing was so good that I no longer felt a desire to mix on an analog console. And then Pro Tools caught up, and Nuendo caught up, and now digital summing. I can't tell the difference between digital summing and analog summing. That was a good thing. But I don't have any other comments.
But was that just making things easier, or did it actually influence?
Accessible.
I'm talking about technology that influences your compositional process. Like I'm maybe talking to the guys that were composing yesterday for the Dome. We could open this question up to people. Is that something that actually influences your creative decisions? And I have a feeling that less with classical music, but when you compose songs and you use that rig, that the way you can layer things with the different is that actually something that makes creative decisions happening?
Yeah, in a way.
Do you jam with that setup?
I don't jam ever. I'm not. No, I sit
See,
down.
that's what I mean.
I go into it knowing what I want to achieve. I mean, the H9s that I use, it's just incredible to have like an actual digital multi-effects pedal that sounds terrific and does everything you need it to do, and it's only this big and it costs less than $1,000 at this point. Like, that's pretty terrific.
But you're making all compositional decisions before that? before technology?
I kind of think, I mean, I'm responding, like, I'll be like, oh, this sounds better, I'm going to make that decision. But no, typically when I sit down, work with that rig, the song already exists. You know, I can play through it at the piano or on the guitar. And I just have to kind of transfer it over to the violin, guitar looping setup, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you even have the synthy violin now. The violin can play the synth sounds.
Yeah, it's kind of dodgy, though. I don't know.
In what way?
It's just about getting the tracking right. With the Zoya, it's cool because you have to filter the sound down to just the range that you want it to track to. And I go even further. They have what's it called? A comparator or something? I forget the name of the object, but you can map it to a scale. So it's you can keep it like within this range, so you don't have the pitch jumping around. But yeah, it's kind of dodgy still. Yeah. I did try using it as a MIDI interpreter and having it trigger an outboard synth, so I could play the violin and it could actually trigger. I had a little mini tour, like the analog Moog thing. It didn't work so well. Yeah, it's just that having to send the MIDI is too much latency. Yeah, so.
You're working with the technology, with what's there, with these machines, gadgets to produce what you want to produce. Like we were saying earlier, part of it wasn't created for for the purpose that you use it.
I mean, yeah, Ken, who designed the Switchblade, who's now passed away, he was surprised to learn that I was using it this way when I talked about lining it up head to toe as I was doing. He was like, "Oh, I never thought about using it that way."
And that's like, is that the spatialization aspects of it, the way that the audience experience?
No, it's just slipping from scene to scene, you know, and so you'll have, like, I mean, one of the tricks that I like is that I do on a couple of songs is I'm actually building a loop that's with violin, overdubbed violin, that's actually quite wide in the stereo field and, you know, lush. But when I start the song, this loop is being run through a very nasty, tight filter, kind of a bit of distortion, also on the H9, and it's mono. And so over the course of the song, I'm fading down that sound and fading up the dry sound, which is, you know, wide and lush. And so but the audience doesn't know that it is as lush until, you know, it kind of blooms towards the end of the song. So this is achieved by just scrolling through presets that gradually fade out the filtered sound and fade in the dry sound. So stuff like that, you know, it's just like, it was nice. Ken said, I've never thought about using it like this before. And what's been interesting is that I haven't been able to really effectively duplicate what this Switchblade can do in any other environment. I've tried I know I could do it in Max MSP if I wanted to go back into Max MSP, but I wasn't able to do it in Gig Performer or with the fractal audio stuff. I can't do it in a DAW like Logic or whatever. So yeah, I'm struggling to figure out how to move it to something else, but yeah. But Vina's saying that I should look at Vile's saying I should look at Kima. Yeah.
Thinking about jamming then, Andre, since just how do you know, have you worked with artists who want to bring that to an orchestra, who wants to have a bit of a more improvised...
The jamming thing?
Yeah. We want to leave things to you know...
Well, I highly...
Unpredictability of the moment.
Because I'm the one... When I'm conducting, I'm the one in the middle, and I get all the slack from the orchestra. I don't want... I mean, when we work with a larger orchestra or the BBC orchestra, everything should be in place. The piece, the arrangements, because I don't want to go there because it's going to be chaos and nobody's going to be helped. I've had situations where, I started a group, you know, when I started this, you know, ensemble, if you like, Stargaze, the idea was to be like a band, but they're all classically trained musicians or musicians that have a classical background as well as others. And we have worked with a lot of artists where we go in a room without any music there and actually start jamming with classical music. So this is why that was the project of my heart, because we started a few musical projects from scratch and wrote songs with a band together. For example, this Polisa project. We actually were in my apartment in Berlin and we had some material from the producer Ryan Olsen, electronics, and we just started improvising over it and putting stuff together like a long form jam. He recorded it and then he went back in the studio and did something with it and sent it back to us again, and then we arranged what we had played, but he had put together in different ways. So an editing process, which is also composition, because what Beethoven did is editing, and then putting new things around it. So we were able to do that, but that's because of the nature of the musicians, and the group wasn't. We were maximum 10 people, so you could do that, and it was all about the mindset, the openness about people hearing things in their mind and playing things and then saying, responding to each other, like chamber music, like free jams. But I've not experienced that with orchestras, and I don't think
Didn't you do this with the Tanya Tagak piece at New Creations in 2017?
Yes, but there was some aleatoric element. So the closest you get to that is that a composer has decided certain moments where certain groups of musicians would do certain things, but it's kind of, it's fed them, it's mouth feeding the musicians, now do this, and sometimes it works less, depends on the orchestra. So yes, that's the closest.
This was a piece that was, it was really interesting. I'd seen Tanya Tagak, who's an Inuit throat singer. She has a 3-piece band with Jesse Zubat and Jean Martin, and they do improvised sets. Okay. And they're dynamite. And they did this concert with this group, Jean's wife, Christine Duncan. She had an element choir, and she did almost kind of John Zorn-esque games with them, and could just get this choir to improvise sounds. Like she has this kind of catalog of symbols and what they mean, and would just gesture to the choir and conduct them like this. It was dynamite. And so we were like, well, we should do this with an orchestra. So Jean wrote a score for André to conduct while Christine was conducting the choir.
Yeah, right, that's right.
Yeah, so 2 conductors on stage. One was conducting from a set score while Christine Duncan was doing the John Zorn style Cobra games. And yeah, it was great. It was amazing. That was one of the best things I've ever seen.
How many musicians then?
Full Toronto Symphony Orchestra.
Okay,
yeah.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I do miss, there was this, what was this other, Efterklang had a sort of project band that went on stage with no prep, what were they called? The Group or something.
Oh really? I never heard
Group.
About this.
And there were members of Efterklang, but also other members. It came a little bit up, I don't know if that was first, or this People Festival where you were there in Berlin with like 100 musicians from all these band backgrounds. It was like band camp and coming together and making music together, creating music together. And they were doing this. And we were inspired, Stargaze, by that to do a gig where we actually went on stage, a classical contemporary music ensemble with no music and not knowing what anybody was going to do. It was thrilling. It was thrilling. And then we did it, and some crazy music happened, and it was recorded, and I don't know where it is. I have no idea. But yeah, it was, maybe it's just because it was liberating for the classical musician in me or us, and but maybe that should be, I wonder if people who write electronic compositions, if you do sort of jam a little bit with your tools, if that's something you do, trying out sounds, putting them together in different ways. I mean, there is when you compose, there is an element of improvisation, isn't it?
Composing is improvisation.
Right.
Yeah.
There you go. Yeah. It's just playing it. I mean, yeah, the making it with an orchestra is a very particular form of, you have the set music and you perform it just as it is. And but in classical music world, everyone looks at this. It seems to be still the pinnacle, that whatever gets performed by orchestras, because of the size of audience and size of halls. I don't know.
Yeah.
It's maybe restricted. Maybe that's quite a restrictive structure.
Film scores, man. We're all got to get into film scoring. That's all people listen to now. It's film scores.
Right.
Yeah.
But there's some very avant-garde. Even nowadays, people write some fairly avant-garde film scores again, and that's cool. And is that another gateway into classical music in general?
I mean, it always has been.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's like who was it who wrote the soundtrack to Alien? Yeah, was it Ellen Bernstein? I think. Yeah. That's like it's basically new music. Like
Jerry Goldsmith.
Oh, Jerry Goldsmith. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. Sorry, Jerry Goldsmith. Yeah.
We have, I think, 10 minutes to take some questions, if anybody has any.
Or comments.
Your comments, yeah.
I want to bring it back to Elizabeth, maybe a final, because I just reminded of the title. Well, first of all, you're a music journalist, and the motivation of writing this book probably was because we're all here because we're passionate about contemporary music, but we all feel probably there's a lack of communicating to enough people to bring them into the fold. Is 2 questions quick. What was your motivation writing this book, to make more people interested in this and divide the gap? And then everything we do is music. If you understood what that means, would it be who actually?
It's a John Cage quote.
It's a John Cage quote. Yeah. Famously.
Yeah, it was. I think I just thought, I don't know, it's so fascinating to me that when somebody like Paul McCartney or Owen or Johnny Greenwood or whoever goes into a space that maybe their fans don't exist in, and brings something of that sound back and puts it in their music, and it opens people's ears to those sounds. And I love that. That was what motivated me. I absolutely loved it. I loved hearing the strings on Thursday night and just these sounds that it's so like, you have a response to it, and people respond to it. And so yeah, that was my motivation. And I just wanted to kind of guide people towards maybe where those influences were coming from and tell people a little bit more. So it's for people who are maybe fans of Radiohead or the Beatles or whoever, and then might enjoy hearing more of what they were listening to.
You're already getting a lot of feedback, right? Because you've been on this book reading tour.
Yeah.
And do people speak to you and say, this was really opened my mind to
Yeah. And I think context is everything, isn't it? If you understand the ideas. Most people have come up to me and said, I never knew what the 433 was about. And we just take it for granted, don't we? And actually, these are people who want to go and find this stuff, and just people saying, I enjoy that, or no, or
what's
that's
the
been
name
nice.
of that guy? I always forget his name. He's like a London-based electronic producer in his 50s, and he has that really popular show on NTS. And it's just all the weirdest music. I always forget the name of that guy. But anyways, I have it saved on my phone. Yeah. I'll look it up later and we can talk about it. But it always impressed me that this was one of the most popular shows on NTS Radio, was just this extremely strange, like, it just reflective of people, really needing to find new sounds, like actually stuff that was going to shock them and stimulate them.
Yeah. Stimulate, exactly. That's
so it's about giving these things space, giving it the space, and then it might be really, really popular. Like our music festival, keep it going. Keep Uden Musik in Lokaku going, please, for this area, for this region. And we'll see you next year.
Hey.
Thank you, Marko, for hosting.
Thank you, Marko.